Okay, welcome back. This is the part 6. This is part 6 of my Let's Build for Ruby and Rails Developers series. Continuing on from part 5, we're going to kind of maybe do some cleanup work that I've spotted after editing the video and kind of uploading it and seeing some stuff I wanted to maybe change. But all in all, this is going to be a very relaxed structure. So continuing on, I think I'm going to focus on maybe getting some design going. Getting some more data to display on this index here. We've got some seeded data at this point with some nice slugs thanks to the friendly ID gem. But regarding the friendly ID gem, I did want to point out that I do a few things a little what you would call, I guess, legacy. So one thing with the friendly ID gem, you can pass in a specific field on the database. But I actually want to pass in an array of fields. So if there are two matched titles ever on a job listing, which is very possible, we want to not just immediately go to the secure random hash that gets added by the gem, but instead you can pass in multiple properties of a table to kind of combine those slugs and make something more unique. So in this case, I think it could be cool if it's the title of the job and then prefaced by the maybe the job or the company name. So in that case, we'd have that in the database already. So this could build that URL dynamically, and that would kind of at least be less of a constraint in terms of getting that link. And I want to make it as shareable as possible. So when you link to it, you'll kind of understand through the URL it's the job title and the company in that case. So instead of title here, what I've seen in the docs is slug candidates. And that's just a way of saying, hey, here's an array of things you could use for the URL should you need to. And in this case, I'm also going to use a finders method that allows us to not have to do the friendly lookup on the controller. So that's essentially saying by passing this array of a symbol through on the controller layer, I don't know if I did this in the last video or not. Yeah, I have this, but we can remove that now. So that addition allows us to kind of just fall back to this here. So we've got that finders method. So that's a nice to have, so I don't have to do that or remember to do that in other places on the controller level. So with all that said, we still need the slug methods, our slug candidates method. So I'll add it below the constants here. So we'll say def slug candidates. And we're going to start initially, I think it's just an entire array. We're going to pass in first the title like we had, and then we can pass an additional array, which will be mapped. And then we could say title and then company name. I believe that's annotated at the top here. Yeah, company name. So what that essentially says is first, if there is a title of the job and it's unique already, great, use it. If not, and there's another job out there and it has the same title, then go ahead and append the company name to that URL too. So that's just a nice to have. You can pass multiple here though. So we could start with title and company name, and then if you want to go further, you could do like created at date or some crazy hash. But the biggest fallback here is it will generate a secure random hash at the end of this if all of these don't match. So that's just one thing I wanted to add. It's probably not 100% necessary for our setup, but you never know. It could happen. And that slug column in the database needs to be unique anyway, so that's a nice to have. So that being said, I think I'll focus now on what's going to render on the front of the jobs. So at any given moment, I think it's going to make some sense to add some scopes for what we're doing. And a job in particular is going to have maybe a published state like we set in our statuses here of pending, published, and I don't know why I put published twice here. It should be archived. And, just kind of go with the flow there. So we'll have those states as scopes, which I'll add up here. One thing I want to do before I forget, I'm on my master branch at the moment, so I'm going to do Rails. I always say Rails, get checkout B, and we'll say part 6, excuse me. So these are the files that have changed so far, that's okay. So get status will show us the diff of those. Awesome. So I won't commit anything yet. I just want to kind of get rolling. Or maybe I will. So git commit. Let's see, extend friendly ID to be more, I don't know, accessible. We're generating friendlier URLs by passing those slug finders and whatnot. So let's start there. Need to actually git add and then commit. All right. So I'll focus back on our layouts and everything else here. It's not looking like I want it to. I don't really have a game plan of what, in the end it will 100% look like. I did make a Twitter account for this app, and I used a nice icon I found for the Ruby gems. So I'm just going to pull up Figma real quick. And basically messing around with ideas for what could be like a slug or not a slug, a favicon or something like that. But I ended up kind of here for a symbol, and then maybe more of like this type for the main full logo. So maybe on a GraphQL image or Open Graph image, whatever you want to call that. So maybe we'll extract just this SVG for now, and we can combine. I think we'll just leave it as is, and we'll say Rails devs mark, something like that. For now, I could export it as any color, but we can change, because it's SVG, we can change anything with it in terms of color. So I'll go ahead and use Figma to do that and just throw it on the desktop. Now, every time I import an SVG in an app, I kind of like to run it through an image optimizer. You could essentially build this as your own tool to do these things on the fly in like your build process. But as many images as I end up using anymore, it's not that big a deal, I think. So I'll just throw it in this image optim GUI. You can download this. I think it's free to download. It does SVGs, images of all types. You can set the setting as well. And it just does wonders for this file size. Figma sucks for file size. So if you ever export anything from that, really recommend throwing it through an optimizing engine. So I'll go back to the code. I'm going to open up a file. So we'll do desktop, and we'll have Rails devs mark. I'm just going to copy this and then create a SVG in our assets images folder. I'm going to create an icon folder, or icons, and then paste this new file. Let's say Rails devs mark.svg, paste that in. There's a group with a fill in here. I'm wondering if I can not have the group and it not mess up. So I think if I pass this out, is it going to mess up what it looks like? We'll find out. So I'm going to remove the fill because I want to be able to target this with Tailwind specifically. And I believe in the beginning I added render SVG method. So if you're not familiar, this basically takes a stab at rendering this SVG tag inline, so I don't have to go and copy and paste this giant code into the view itself. Instead, the method kind of does that for me and looks a lot nicer inside the views. So we can validate that that works. So I'm going to go into the shared header. I want to replace this kickoff path with the actual logo itself. And we might have to add some text to make this a little more accessible, because just adding that Ruby icon might be not enough. So using the application method that we added, I just showed you, we just need to point basically to the mark itself. So if you recall that helper application helper, this is already going to go and find, based on the Rails conventions, it's going to look in the assets images folder for us. But we do need to denote what folder within that we need to pass in. So thanks to how Rails works, we don't have to worry about passing like a full public URL or something like that to this. We do just need to pass in the path within the images folder and then the icon name. We don't even need the .svg suffix either. To make this a little more accessible, you can pass in a title property as well as, of course, the styles, which I call styles because this already has a class name. You could probably change that if you were wanting to use class here and just kind of bypass this somehow. But those would conflict otherwise. So there's a little more behind the scenes there. So let's try this. Rails devs mark. And if styles works, we could just say fill current. Since it's SVG, we can talk fills and strokes. And then text gray, I don't know, 700 just to start. I want to see if it just renders first. And if it doesn't, that's okay. Rendering template, I don't think I closed. Styles, feels gray, link to do. Okay, so file name, undefined method.svg. Why is that not working? Okay, so that works, but for some reason my method is not. I'm trying to understand why. No method error, SVG, but it's supposed to be. Do I need to pass in SVG now? Like if I don't do this? So that works. I guess that's something that's weird. Maybe it's thinking it's an object in this case. So name.svg. So I think I might have. Oh, okay. I typed it wrong. It should be .svg outside of the interpolation. Got it. Okay. Well, that huge aside, let's do this right now. Why won't it display with 6 or 8, 6 maybe? Let's see. Now I'm passing .svg this time, so if we don't do that, then we get, okay, finally figured it out. Okay, so title will be Rails devs, just to give it some sort of accessible attribute there, and we might make that a tad bigger, so 8. Cool. And I think because it's Ruby on Rails, the color typically is red, so let's try one of the defaults from Tailwind and see kind of where we're at with things. If any of these kind of jive. Yeah, that looks okay. So maybe we'll do transition. Actually, I want to do group. And then what's neat about group is you can do group hover. And we'll say text red 600. This might not be a default setting at this point. Yeah, so we need to swap our Tailwind config real quick. We go down to group. Or what are we doing? Text color. Text color. If we do group hover here, we should get that option. Or should it be group? I think it should be group. Maybe not. Yeah, it's group hover. Compile that down. Maybe. There we go. So now, because I'm linking, basically hovering over the link, because it's got the group class, we can go ahead and toggle the SVG attribute too. So it's kind of like saying in CSS, like dot or a, write your CSS within that. You can do like a SVG, and then you get that additional layer of control. I'm torn if I should add the text Rails devs here. Maybe we'll do it for now, just kind of like that. And I'll do span. So I want to kind of get this in line. So we can do a flex here. And then add some margin to that. Like 2. Okay. And I'll probably do like text size. Text XL is up here. I'll just reset that to large perhaps. Yeah. And font bold. Cool. And text will also be, we can just leave the text up here to resemble red 500. Be a little darker with the text. Okay, and then hover text red 700. So Tailwind starts to look like garbage after a while, you know, but I think it serves its purpose. Tune this down a little bit. Okay, we don't have 7. 6. We go back to 6, I suppose. Cool. Maybe I'll just make this the same to follow suit. Okay, great. That's a start. I think I want to change the font. We're going to use, there's a one I really like right now. Actually, Tailwind UI uses it, Enter font. And it's by someone, I think the dude who works at Figma right now. I don't know, it's just like you get sick of the Helveticas and the Arials and all that, and this just kind of has the more good looking stuff. Oh, it's actually a Google font. Nice. Let's do this. I like the very dark version and regular. And that should do it. I don't want to load too many fonts. It gets quite nasty in that case. So we can actually do this. I don't like to use the import method personally. So we'll go to layout. And we can add this, I guess, in the head file. We'll throw it by the other style sheets. So probably put it first so we have the fonts available to us. And you could go all Rails with this style sheet, or you can just leave it as is. I'll probably just follow suit with Rails convention. So you just essentially do this. That way we can do some of this stuff. Okay. Now I've got that available to us. We still need to set the font itself though, so I can do that actually in Tailwind specifically. So I'll go back to that config. And our basic sans, I think, will be this font. So right now it's set to just system. We can just extend this to include that. So enter. Nice. That might require a refresh on everything, but I could be wrong. Yeah, I believe it's rendering right. If we could just remove this for now. Does it work? All right, so we'll just uncomment that. Ensure we have it ready. So roll. See, it's kind of flinching there. Cool. Yeah, that looks like it should. Just wanted to verify. It wasn't quite clear. So, okay, we'll leave that alone. I think that's all I'm going to use it for in that case. The header itself, I don't want it to be very like in-your-face color scheme, really. I think clear and concise wins with the job board. Specifically because then you're just kind of going to town looking for listings. You don't want to be stuck in the way of unnecessary UI or clutter. So maybe we'll even go white. I don't know. So let's go back. And I think I want to do black for this font. Yeah, that looks good. With that set up, we can go and kind of just go down the line. So what's going to be in our navigation might entail some pretty basic stuff to start. I will eventually be maybe like the form aspect, then of course the sign in sign out stuff. Some drop down functionality I think would be smart. I always talk about adding categories to this, and I'm wondering if I should, or should be tags. Like if it's a Rails dev or a Ruby dev, that's basically the category. So I feel like that doesn't really need its category. Maybe just the tagging system would make more sense. That's an additional thing haven't thought about doing quite yet, but it would make sense to do, I think. So we'll have to figure out how to do tags. There's probably a gem like X as taggable. I don't know how up to date this is, but yeah, there's like commits from 10 years ago. So, but it's probably worthy of using. We could just install it. Yeah, it's a tag list. Okay. You can add tags, remove tags. Cool. So I might need to do some reading on this and then come back maybe in the next part and figure this part out. For now, let's get some of the UI in order. I want to get the new job form going too. Like, this doesn't look good at all. So I think we'll route to the job index page. So let's check our routes out. Right now we're routing to home index. I feel like job index probably makes more sense in this case. Home is kind of Index is going to have just all the jobs, which, okay, that makes sense. But like I said before, I want to have some scoping mechanisms, I think, in the job model. So let's add those too. I think published will be one. Since we've got those statuses, we can set those pretty much explicitly and get going with it. I'd like to add some descending patterns in terms of ordering and ascending. So we could do that too if we need it. These are just really great ways to chain things inside your controllers when you're fetching data. So maybe I'll group this as like scopes, relations, constants. So scopes will end up being like so. We do kind of a lambda function here. So descending is the first one I want to add, which is kind of what I default to. And we'll say order, just created at. And you can pass a symbol as DSC, or DESC. And that's that. So you can just chain that to your query when you're in the controller, and it should just go ahead and work. And the thing about scopes, and one thing that when I first started, I was like, oh, that's how they should work. Everything, when you think about a scope, assume it can be chained no matter what. So think of the chainable fashion. So you could throw it on a query anywhere for any model. Well, in this case, it would be the job model specifically, but this could go up higher one class. It could be a global scope if you want. So we could say scope pending, and we'll pass in the lambda of where status job statuses. We've got this built-in constant below. If I can type. And just pass in pending. Cool. So we can essentially do this for published, and I might add archive functionality later on. It's more of like a soft delete, just in case someone were to ever want to repost a job. We could potentially bring that back from the dead, even though it's not technically deleted. Maybe the admin's the only one that has control to really strong delete. I don't know that I have this status, so let's check that. Yeah, archived. So these are mapping here. Cool. So that means on the controller now, I just can say, what do we got? Published, and then DSC, and it's good to go. So now we have our jobs, and they're gonna default to pending. If you recall, when we made the new job migration, it defaulted to pending on all the jobs because it needs admin level review first. That's what I wanted to do. I don't want any job to really be able to just go live, because I think there's some people out there who kind of abuse the system, you know. So that said, we can kind of dig into that. So job.last, you'll see, oh, it's actually published. What the fuck? What's up with that? Let's check our controller. Published, where job standard, oh, because you need to add published, typo. So in that case, these should all come back. And if we just grab job.all, we can see all those come back. All of them should be published, I guess, in this point. I assume they'd be default to pending, though I don't recall. Let's check our schema quick. Jobs, yeah, default should be pending. Interesting. So if I create a new job, it's because I seeded the job, I think. So let's try this. Sign out. I think I created Andy at webcrunch. Just want to create a basic job here. Oh my god, it's unusable. Okay, while we're at it, let's fix this form up. It looks awful. And I need to append the action text CSS apparently. We can do that in a variety of ways. I think what I'm going to do is use the asset pipeline because I think we're going to use that for a few things as well. So action text should be coming down the pipe. Why is it not? I think I need to require action text here. I don't know if you do it like that, action text. Could be wrong with that. I know I've Googled this before, so if I go to Google, action text, CSS not loading. Okay, so we could just essentially do let's try that instead. So instead of that pipeline, we can try our JavaScript packs entry point. If we do something like so, import. Wrong file. Should be here, I think. And I'll throw it at the top so we don't do wrong with the ordering. Import cannot be found in action text. So let's try the migrated. We did that. We did that. Let's check this blog out. Install, migrate. Let's try this too. What's with everyone using single quotes? Not a huge fan of that. Failed to compile. Okay, so that package doesn't exist is what it's telling me. What about this? No? Yes? Maybe? So? Something's up. Let's run this again. I have an alias for Webpack Dev Server. Typically it's running Webpack Dev. Oh shit. Bin Webpack Dev Server, but goddamn, that's a lot to type. So I just did a WDS in my ZSH config, and it kind of worked out. But there we go. So that ended up working. These look atrocious to me, but we can figure that out coming up. And that's the description, and then the company description. If you recall, there has rich text fields, so we'll deal with those. But let's kind of soup up this form a bit. I have in my kickoff Tailwind template some basics in terms of styles. Maybe we'll start there and kind of extract things if they start to look like we need to. So inside the JavaScript folder, if you go to style sheets, I have a components folder, assuming you followed along this far. There's some default buttons and forms styles that I've used. It's all PostCSS/SAS/CSS. So there's quite a bit of junk going on here, but it's looking pretty good to me usually. With every input, we're going to have an input class. With every label, we'll have a label class. I didn't want to target the elements directly because you usually find yourself overriding those with additional CSS, and I don't like to do that. Tailwind ships with like no styling, as you can see, so like everything's bare bones. So we'll kind of come back. I do input groups around each input and label, and that's just essentially saying, hey, throw margin on the bottom. And then we have some fancy stuff for checkboxes and radios, which I'll go into more detail as we use those. But yeah, that's kind of my status in terms of what I ship with, in terms of how I work. I kind of have this starting point to go with. But let's first get the fields going, making them look not crap. So let's go to form labels. I'll just Command D all these fields. And I'll go to the front and then the back, and then we will add a comma, class, label. And I will do the same here. So form, sadly, those are tougher. So, okay, so in reality, this form's not going to be existent in the app, but I want to get it to where we could add some test data just to confirm my theory that we've got a pending status on a default form. So I'm going to say this job should be pending. So there we go. Right there, the label for these fancy checkboxes to work. One thing that might get you if you're following along, the label needs to be after the checkbox, just a kind of a quirk to deal with that crap. So let's just say 5. If we create this, it's going to say user must exist. Okay, so we need to go to the controller temporarily at least and do on create. We'll say if jobs. We need to assign the user to the job. So essentially is doing that relationship. Damn, if I go back, is that going to be there? Yeah. So if I create it now, I think it should save. Maybe not. ID already exists. I don't really get why that's the case. I think it's because I seeded data that already have these files, or the ID, I should say. So that sucks. Looks like I spelled company name wrong as well. So we need to add those parameters first off. Company name. I think I tried to format this the last video and it was a pain in the ass. I'm going to do it again. And we'll just sort these. Shit. Okay. And we've got title, upsell type. Okay, what were the unpermitted params? Company description. And description. So this isn't going to work because we seeded that data. If I wanted to really make it work, we could go and maybe I could just keep refreshing this until there's a new ID. There we go. That's a stupid hack, but basically we've set new jobs on our database already that have the existing IDs that the database thinks is the ID it should be assigning. Long story short, that's what happens when you set IDs manually. But yeah. So if we notice the last job isn't here, if we can do some consoling, we can just say job.last. And you notice it's pending because I created a new job. It's doing that database level thing that says it's pending. There's some nils here, I believe, because we didn't add certain properties that we should do, but we'll get to some of those when we get to them. Like I said, this form is definitely not the proof of concept that we'll be using. It's going to be all Vue.js, but we will need the controller logic, so we'll set that up as we can. Let's see, we got headquarters. I don't even think I have headquarters in here. So I might add that. just to get it. We are going to be able to edit it. So once you post a job, it won't be Vue.js. Instead, it will be a Rails form. And, you know, I don't think it needs to be a Vue app for that. It's basic stuff to edit an existing job. So I wanted the experience of creating one to be most magical. Just want to make sure we've got all the fields that I would normally not get in this scenario. Estimated hours, I don't think is one. So I'll add that. And what else was there? So it's going to be huge ass form, which is why I'm like, okay, we need to figure some of this out with Vue because it'll be dependent on other things otherwise. Description, compensation type is one of those. So this could technically be the edit form on a job. So we're going to need this regardless in that case. So what I can do in that case is kind of just on the edit page itself on a job, we'll be able to allow the user who posted the job to do that and use this form directly. And on the new form, we'll have the Vue mounted app version. So we'll get to that. Like I said, we could edit a job just so we're in that context. This one, okay. So we've got some stuff here. Company name, we could say Google. Estimated hours. If we've got a range here, we wouldn't have an hourly. Or yeah, we would, I think. If it's full-time, this wouldn't be here. So we'd kind of have that dependency going on. So we can style this up and get something rolling. What it could look like could be pretty basic. Maybe I'll give it a stimulus controller to kind of give some functionality out of the box with some of the, maybe if we just have a full-time preference, we wouldn't need to add the hourly field and all those things, so they wouldn't be visible to not confuse the user. So let's start with some basic padding. BG white, perhaps, border rounded. Let's throw that in a wrapper. There we go. Believe on the new, in the edit field itself, we can do, we're editing a job. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of these because I don't need them. Kind of set a smaller class of max width here. 4XL, MX Auto, to center it. And we'll just do like a H1 for that. Give it some, I'm guessing a lot of this, so don't think this is perfect out of the gates. I'm going to use that black font, I think, for the headings. I'm kind of just throw this in a centered fashion. So there we go. So something like that's a little more constrained, fancier to look at. Some of these fields could probably be floated left and right. Definitely won't use floats, but more or less flexbox to handle that, or CSS grid, of course. So like company name and website, we could throw those. Those make sense, I think. Company name and website. I can't believe I spelled that wrong. So we could do grid or flexbox, your preference. I'm leaning towards grid more since it's possible in Tailwind. Grid columns would be, you could do even just 2 here and it would just work. So maybe we'll do that. And then each col span will be 1 on larger screens. So we'll say large will be 2. And then on mobile, we'll say grid col. I think it's grid cols 1, not columns. So essentially that says on my bigger screen here, that's going to spread one on the left and one on the right. And then on smaller screens, this should break down to one column, just like that. Okay. One thing we need to do just to kind of make this work the way we want, though, is to do the call span 1. And that will just set it to explicitly span one of the columns instead of, 2 if it were to. We don't have gap though, so we could say grid gap. This is what I like about grid, is I don't have to do any margin or padding like you would with Flexbox. So we could say grid gap like 6 or something. Or I think it's just gap. Yeah, so then you get that stuff that's balanced and all ready to go. The problem is on the margin, we need to kind of mess with that a bit. So we'll only need one of these. And then on this specific one, no, we don't. We can just leave it as is. I think we should work out. Are they going to smash into each other? No. Okay. So cool. That's kind of what I'm thinking. We just kind of pan the ones that make sense for left and right. So compensation type would be full time. I think that should be a select field. We can just order from our constants. So select in this case, we could say select. And I think selects are funky. So let's double down on what that should look like. We do options for select, which might make sense. So options for select. These are part of the form helpers for Rails. So if we do, in that case, we can feed in the statuses or the compensation types. So if we go back to job, we will get those. My dog is breathing so loud. Compensation types. Here we go. That should just loop through those for us, I believe. And then on the other spectrum, we need to actually open up another hash to pass in the class itself. I think that should do it. So we still need the class of select on it. I don't think it's rendering. Yeah. So I think, oh, okay, yeah, I do this all the time, I swear. So if we do a prompt here, just say select one. So you could do a prompt, or you could just say don't, do one. Either way, it just kind of gives you a select. Now we need that select arrow though, since I made this styled. So I often make this little helper that's just a nice HTML select arrow, so I don't have to remember what the SVG is or where to copy it from. And it looks like this. I just do one of these things and print it out. Now I don't have this set up yet, so I can go to my application controller or helper if I can type. And we could just say select arrow. And oftentimes I will go to the Tailwind docs and grab like an example version of it because there's a lot to copy from it. But oftentimes it could be a partial too. So I'll do something like so and say partial. And we'll say shared select arrow like that. And then we can create that partial down in shared. Then finally, that will have the content that we need. It's a lot of work to just have an arrow, but I find if you do the grunt work first, it's just way easier to add later on. So this will be, I think it's like a div. I think we're going to go to Tailwind docs real quick. And I think he's got some components. Not this. Documentation components. Yeah, like this. So forms. There's one example with an arrow. the state on this one. That's what I want, but I just want the arrow of it. So it's this right here. I wish that were just like a part of Tailwind, just like some built-in. But that's essentially it. So we've got this field. It does the trick and looks pretty good on its own. So if we revert back to our page and go into full-time, I believe it should be rendering that, but I don't see that it is. Okay, we need one caveat to all of this is that the div surrounding it needs to have a position of relative. And then you should see it kind of working, maybe. I think that's because we have some margins. So it needs to be a div around just the select field. Such a conundrum to work through, but to make it look right, it's worthwhile, I think. There we go. Cool. So I see the fonts flickering, and I'm wondering why they are. I feel like I don't have those quite right, but we'll come back to those if we need to. This looks like that Enter Sans one, so I don't know. So let's do the compensation type, and then we'll float. Both of these will be to the right, and then depending on what you select, I want to hide one and show the other kind of thing, if that makes sense. So contract's going to be hourly maybe. But then again, it could be both. So if you select contract, perhaps I show just hours in that case. I'm trying to think that through. Otherwise, full-time would just hide it. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So maybe we'll do a 3-up in this case. And maybe it could flex. So we could do, where's this at? In this case, we might need to use Flexbox since it flexes. So let's do that. So let's just say flex item center, justify start, and I will do these 3. And that should do this nonsense. But we want to make the first one, we want to make them even for starters. And since this is one input group, we can just do that. In this case, I'll say large width 1/3. Let's do flex 1. I'm trying to think how this should work. Maybe I will make this one a specific width, but I want the other two to kind of round about that extra width in that case. So we'll get rid of these classes, and we'll say so like if I select contract, I only want these two to show up, but I want them to be even width, you know. But if I select full-time, or excuse me, if I select contract, I want all of them to show up like they are. But if I select full-time, I want it to be half and half, if that makes sense. So let's come back to that. That's going to be probably Stimulus.js I reach for to do that. But yeah, headquarters would be California. I think that can move up to the company area. And perhaps this could span 3. But I don't want to shrink that too much. So maybe we'll do that. Maybe the link to apply and this will live just like these two. So we can copy that logic. Okay, and okay. Years of experience, I think we'll put that alongside remote. Right on. Maybe this one's less of a span, so we could do span like 4. This is 1, but this one would be 3, or 1. This would be 3. then you get something like that. Or maybe we just do 2. And maybe we'll do 5. Then we can use a 3 here. I don't know, something like that. It's not a huge deal, but that's just annoying to look at in my perspective. So maybe we'll put this one first in the line. Okay, and perhaps I'll just make this block level after all. I just want to make it a set width though, so width 1/2. We'll come back and probably make this nicer to look at. So there won't be any flexing or anything. It's just put group, input, checkbox. Okay, good. Then I just have it blocked like that. And in fact, to kind of follow suit from the top ones, I'll go with 3rd and PR4. And we'll just do that on the large screens. I need to go back and make sure those are just on large. Oops. So mobile would be a little more nicer. This might need to be a little bit more since we're doing padding on the left side as the other one as well. So like that. Okay. And hopefully on mobile, yeah, that needs to flex break or wrap. Boom. Okay. And then with full here. Large with auto with full. Large with auto with full. There we go. And then for these, they would just need, actually I do 6 on the class. And did I just do margin there? That's not right. Margin bottom, margin bottom. 6, there we go. Okay, so that's a little more balanced. Estimated hours could probably be less of a margin there. Yeah, we can just get rid of the margin on that one. Because we have the input, oh, wrong one. Input group class on this one. Is that right? Yeah, we have input group class on the main input. So on desktop, this makes sense, but below we need to kind of get rid of this one since it's already covered on the parent div. Sorry if this is all not making sense already, but it's just kind of workflow with Tailwind, at least for me. That title could be way cooler. Do something like that. And maybe like on large screens you do that, and text 2L XL on smaller screens. Yeah, it's not perfect, but gets the job done. Cool. Looks like the button isn't rendering in the form like it should. An extra div there for whatever reason. Okay, so on the bottom we'll give it quite a bit of margin just so we can scroll past the point of needing to. What's up with this? Estimated hours. Okay, I think it's just because I put the flex wrap, so we'll say large flex no wrap, I think is the class. Yeah, there we go. All right, the form flickering there is bugging me. I think on the forms CSS I have label font bold, but I don't have the bold font from Google, I don't think. So maybe I will get that. Let's try that. And let's update this link real quick. So head. This might make our labels look crazy though, so we'll see. Or not. It does absolutely nothing. Yeah, definitely prefer bolder there, but okay. So that's our basic form. I've gone well over an hour at this point. I think the next video we might clean up the index a bit and go to town there. But the new job form, like I said, it's going to look like this right now, but we're actually going to strip this away. In fact, I'll do that real quick on the new. We're just going to get rid of this. It's going to be like a view app, so maybe we'll just add a comment. Mount view app. And this will be what I'm thinking is a step-by-step form. We'll do it part by part, just so if you saw all those fields before, look at how daunting that is. Like when you're filling out a form and have at least the context of what you're doing, you want at least to do it in little baby steps, I think, just to get it, make it easier on people and their thought and cognitive load. I think this is the name. So let's focus on that next. Like I said, I want to clean up at least this view. Our account view is pretty poor as well. Like all that stuff I think can be an afterthought, but I'm a designer first, so I like to focus on some of that stuff. So we'll at least get the groundwork laid for that and then take on this view app. So I know you're probably looking forward to that. So here we go. I'll see you in the next part. Hello Rails is my new course on Ruby on Rails. I'll teach you Ruby on Rails from the ground up. Visit hellorails.io for more information.